The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark, I cannot see.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker at Elkins Consulting. And a reminder for our listeners who are interviewing for jobs, our new course, Get Hired, Job Interview Storytelling, is available now for just $199, which includes the online course as well as a small group storytelling practice session. Visit elkinsconsulting.com for more information. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast for months or years, you know I always love to dive into authenticity, identity, and relevance as part of every episode. Today's guest, Jens Madsen, is a biomedical engineer and researcher at City College of New York. And I discovered his work along with his colleague, Lucas Pera, when I started research for my second book, which is about the impact of our personal narratives and the stories others tell about us on our identity, our authenticity. And I am so grateful for Jens' time today. You'll understand why as soon as we get started. Jens, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Well, you're welcome.
I usually almost always start by asking my guests to share something about themselves that most people might not know about them, something not on your bio or your LinkedIn profile. Do you have something in your head that you could maybe share with us?
I think in terms of my academic world and my career, I started off as a computer geek. I sat there playing all these computer games and everything. I loved it. Even when I was a little toddler, I remember I snuck up to my parents' computers and eagerly waiting for them to be done working with these computers so that I can, have my fun time. And this is way back when people didn't necessarily have, everybody had a computer. Now we have smartphones. Everybody has a computer. But back then, that wasn't the case. And so I was always fascinated by computers. And one thing that I realized is that my trajectory through the choice that I had, or the choices that I made in terms of what occupation that I wanted to pursue, or what education, or sort of anything that sort of those big decisions, was always driven by sort of curiosity and passion, this excitement, And one thing I really noticed was like going from computer science to, I went into acoustical engineering. It was a fascination of sound and a fascination of music. I went into studying what emotions are expressed in music using these AI tools. Again, just because I thought both the tools was fascinating, but also relating that to my personal life, where I feel music plays a really, really huge role. And so that combination of sort of using yourself and what means something to you and what's really sort of important to you, at the same time as what you think is fun to play with. And combining those things has always been something that's been driving me. And it's been driven me all the way from Denmark, where I grew up, to now living in New York City.
I love that. Oh my gosh, you're just speaking my language, that curiosity, music, sound, combining something that makes you enthusiastic with something else that is seemingly unrelated, like technology and how sound affects emotion.
Right.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I think, one thing we do, at least what I do, is just, now I work in neural engineering. I'm in neuroscience, and one thing that we can just based all our research questions on all our sort of what we're interested in investigating is ourselves. So I'm a person in our environment, and I'm observing myself doing all these things and reacting to these things. And these tools, music has this effect on me, narrative has effect on me, all these things. And how does that make me feel? Oh, actually, you know what, this does this to me. Let's actually sort of make it that an official question and investigate it. And oftentimes this turns out that, this by basic observation, and anybody could do this, right? You can have a question and you could go out and say, let's investigate it. I just chose to make that my profession.
Wow. I love that. It took me so long to get to this point where I realized that I could combine all those loves and curiosities. It took me into my 50s to realize that. So I so appreciate hearing it starting from such a young age, that curiosity and combining all of those interests in a career path, which, yeah, that's terrific. Well, thank you. And so you started as a computer science, studying computer science, and partly because you loved games.
Yeah, that's just computer thinking. Yeah.
Yes. And it just makes me curious, because I know that my sons both play video games, but especially my older one has always been highly affected by the music from the video games. And that plays a huge role in how those games are perceived, is what music they choose depending on the conditions and environment of the game. So I remember there was a old software product back in the early 2000s called KidPix. And it was basically animation software designed for little kids. And I remember watching my son. He was maybe 4 years old, and he had asked me to put on KidPix. And he would play a sampled song that was really sad. And he'd play it over and over and over again. And one time I walked in and I saw him doing this, and his head is down on his arms, like his arms are crossed on the desk, his head is down, and he's just quietly, like just pensive. And I said, "Jacob, what are you doing?" He said, "Just listening." And I said, "That sounds like a sad song. Are you okay?" He said, "I like it." And from that moment on, I knew that there was a sensitivity about him that was different. And to this day, certain games, he downloads the soundtrack so he can listen to it while he's working. So was that part of your experience with computer games? Was it about the music, or like, I know I'm triggering a memory here for you. Tell me about it.
No, I think for me in the beginning, computers was just, the curiosity of the way that you formalize things, structure things. I think, and you have a structured mind, that I like to sort of think about a problem as not just one big problem, but try to sort of put and sort of try to reduce these problems to smaller problems that then we can solve, right? And that way of thinking is very much like a computer. Computers, you have all the different parts, and you know the different function, and you know what they're supposed to do. Even when you write code, it's the same thing. It's just a way of thinking of, well, this is not deal with the whole problem of, let's say, making a game. You need to have, you have to have an interface, you have to have like some graphics, you have to have some gameplay, some mechanics, you have to have the sound and music and all those things, right? I think that's what fascinated me. In terms of the musical and emotional component, I think I'm just, maybe as you were saying, a sensitive person. I don't really know what that means in terms of, because I think at least I think we all are, and we just have to allow ourselves to be that. It's and say this is okay. And I mean, the function of music, oftentimes in our early age, if you do these meta surveys, like there's been a bunch of these meta surveys asking people what function does music serve in your life? Why do you have it? Why? I mean, there's there's the whole evolutionary kind of the cheesecake kind of analogy, where you can say where does it come from an evolutionary perspective? You can just ask people, why do you have it? And one of the most common answers to that question is that music regulates our emotional state. Right? So it has that ability. So if you sit there, and even though you sit there and listen to something sad, it doesn't necessarily have to make you sad, but it can introduce you to an emotion that is expressed through this piece of music. And sort of you can learn, this is what that feeling feels like. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not bad to feel sad. It's not bad to feel happy, And I think music can, at least in its very early ages, can introduce us to these different emotional experiences, emotions in general, And I think that's important. And another aspect, of course, music in adolescence is We listen to it to sort of just figure out who you are, sort of very through the lyrics, people are expressing different thoughts and ideas and emotions. And, that's like a very safe space, at least in terms of emotional expression. You feel safe and you can hear what these people are talking about. There's other factors, but I think for me, at least, I listen to a lot of music, even sad and happy in an early age. And I've done it ever since. Now I basically use it as a tool. I use it as a tool to regulate my emotional state. I have music that when I sit there and I code, when I do my engineering, I put music on. When not always. Silence is also beautiful. I need to have, room with my own thoughts, but music can be used as a tool. And I think some people are more aware of it than others. And also it's not that music has this universal appeal to everyone, that it just regulates everybody's emotional state. No, for some people, it's just like a background music thing and it's nice. But other people, a little bit more invested in it.
Is that similar to, so I was reading your article about how when we experience a story together, our heartbeats start to fluctuate in synchronicity. Mm-hmm. And when I read that, I dove in a little deeper into that because I was so curious. It's not that our heartbeats are in sync, but that they fluctuate in sync. So when my heart rate goes up, your heart rate goes up, maybe at different levels, but it's that fluctuation that's the same. But the one thing that was very specific was you have to be paying attention. So if you have an audience of 100 people and only 40 of you are actually paying attention, not on your phones, not thinking about work, but actually paying attention to the story being told, that's when it works. And music is the same way, right? So if a person is listening to it as background and they're not aware of it, is that the difference?
Yeah, I mean, you can think of it as a narrative story has very low level physical properties, like the speech that comes out of not in terms of semantics or what it actually means, but just the low levels. I mean, it's making sound up and down. You can make my mouth is shaping, to make all these wonderful formats and all my glottal postage. So our physiology, to a certain extent, follows that, but not a lot. Then you have a higher level, which is the sort of the meaning of it, right? So this is basically the narrative, the semantics, or whatever you have of that narrative, or the piece of music that will drive sort of higher order cortical processes, and these then have an effect on our physiology. Like you have this fluctuation of the heart rate, so and you have this parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system that's sort of pushing and pulling our rate of heart, right? And so what we're measuring is that people's heart rates, if they're paying attention and to the actual narrative or the piece of music, then our heart starts fluctuating in synchrony. A lot of people think, so now our hearts start to do exactly beating at the same time. That's not the case. No, it's the rate of the fluctuation.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's so cool. So what made you decide, you started with music, studying how music affects our emotional being and our physiological states. What made you decide to then shift and understand that stories can have a similar effect?
Right. I think when I studied during my PhD, and I was in a more computer science environment, where we design these algorithms and everything, to figure out what emotions are expressed in music. And I think at that point in time, we're wondering, well, so what are we going to use this for? We're going to make a new Spotify where you can search for happy jazz or sad rock, whatever. But that's the question came up. What purpose does music actually serve in people's lives? And then the idea, well, not the idea. I mean, it's a fact that people use to regulate your emotional state. And so if you want to the idea came up that we sort of coined music as medicine. So how can we administer music to potentially regulate the emotional state so that maybe we don't have to use so many pharmaceuticals or whatever, right? I mean, that could be a very nice, non-invasive just treatment. Here's some music and then you feel better.
Listen to this.
Right? Yeah, listen to this. And like, oh, that made me happy. Like, or that, like, I don't know, stop my rumination or, like allowed me to regulate my emotional state so that it brings me into a state where I'm more comfortable talking about whatever traumatic experience, whatever. So a lot of different things that we thought about. So how can we measure how people feel? Right? And so I needed to know something about physiology, the brain, the whole body. Right? How do I get that? And then I got this job offer here at City College, although it's about online education, which is something entirely different, but nonetheless, it's still within the biomedical, field and neural engineering. So, there's possibility at least to learn the tools. And of course I have this interest in music. And so the projects that we sort of worked on was about online education. So how can we track what people are paying attention to? And we started that with the brain, but in online educational setting, it's not really that practical if you have to attend a course and you have to wear a cap every single time. So we thought about something less invasive. So the idea was, we can do eye movements, right? So we can track people's eye movements and see whether or not they're paying attention in class, or doing video lectures. But it's still, you have to have a webcam. We do with webcam, so like we do a webcam eye tracking, but it's still a little bit less. I mean, it's not super
accurate or easy to
less invasive, right? And so the heart rate came up. Well, heart rate, a lot of people actually wear these heart rate monitors, right? And maybe we can sort of go there, which makes it even more accessible. Right? And so we sort of went in a direction. Well, I did anyway. I was very fond of all these physiological signals. I don't think my superiors were that fond of it, but I did anyway.
You weren't that interested.
No, I mean, the brain is, the holy grail, and then everything else is a little, I don't know,
secondary.
Yeah, exactly. I think the light switch when I went. So yeah, we did that about the narrative and the heart rate. I mean, initially it was very much from a sort of online educational setting. So this is a case where people watch these videos or listen to narratives. I'm just finishing up a paper now about how auditory narratives, sort of stories where people, they tell about how they met their love, which for me is like, I love it. It's the perfect stimuli. I'm a sucker for anything that's romantic or anything like that. So it was perfect. But there we look at like the heart and all that, and like how can we, which parts of the narrative is it also that apparently is attracting our attention.
Oh, so you're a romantic.
Yeah.
That drives so much of what you do in terms of emotion and being sensitive. You described yourself as sensitive, like my son. And when I think about I don't have a strong definition for a sensitive person. I know there is one within the psychology world of highly sensitive person. But when I talk about a sensitive soul, I think about somebody who is, their emotions are easier to experience or to see. Their emotions are more obvious to me. And I don't consider myself a particularly sensitive person because it's just not a surface for me. And I love that you found something that really feeds that part of you, as opposed to so many, especially men, have a tendency to hide that side and not want to show it, and some fear of appearing weak. And I look at my son, who doesn't have that fear, and he's so warm and compassionate and loving. So I'm seeing so much of what you're talking about in my son, and it just is, it's warming me up. I don't know if you can see that, but so where was a time, or when was an experience you had where you realized that this was really important to you? Like maybe it was when you were watching the interactions among people in an audience, or when you got to share what your research was and somebody was like me getting all excited about it? When was a recent experience where you got to do that, where you had that opportunity to feel the impact of what you were doing?
I think that there's two situations. One is one of the more sort of, I don't know how you phrase it, but like a very low level sort of impact. So I do these experiments, and people that don't realize that, of course, when we do these articles, we have all these small dots on all these plots, but it turns out that every single dot is, when we do like whatever plot trying to show that the heart rate, the synchrony of heart rate is modulated by attention, each of those dots is a person. Right? And so I'm there with that person, bring them in, welcome them in. We did that through COVID. We did all these measurements on, right? And one thing that, they come in, I can give a little introduction in the beginning, sort of, because they're very nervous about it. When they enter the room, they're super nervous. They're like, what are you going to do?
What's going to happen?
They see this box they have to sit in, because we do these experiments in isolation. There's no social interaction in shit. You could do that. We just don't do it just because we want to sort of be sure that we don't have any social component. I'm still open to look into that component, but that's not what we've done so far. And people go in there, and I have to put all these sensors on people, right? I have to put the cap on, I have to put all these things, and people are very insecure about the body, what their body maybe is doing, the brain signals, their heart rate. I hope not. I hope my brain is not like freaky, weird, different, or is my head shaped like is it big, small? Because I have to put a cap on people when we measure people's brain waves, or just in general, like, is everything okay? Like these people are very worried. And one thing I can tell them that is, we're literally measuring how similar your responses are to that of other people. I can tell you that you're remarkably similar. The way that we respond to things, people have all these thoughts on this thing. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe when I see this narrative, I hear this speech, all these things, I'm probably the only one that has those thoughts or those ideas or anything like that, right? I can just tell people, no. Listen, you are remarkably similar to other people, not trying to remove their identity.
Individuality, right?
Individuality. I'm not going there at all because there's plenty of variation, but there's a lot of things that are also very, very similar between us, right? And even, we have here at City College, being in New York City, we're up on the northern part of Manhattan, right? And just the people that we have coming in and doing these experiments, it's all shapes and sizes, age, whatever, gender, you name it, any parameter you can kind of tweak, they're there, right? And people are still remarkably similar. And that, I think, at least when I tell that to people, I don't know, I feel like they leave in the more, reassured, because we're humans. That's what we are. We're not that different. And I think at least that makes me smile.
I feel like you have somebody in mind, like a particular person that you said that to.
Oh, I've said it to many people.
Yes,
trust me. This is
but
not
I
just.
know. I speak to many people and many podcast guests, but when somebody asks me a question like that, one person comes to mind, or three people. So who's that one person that popped into your head that you were visualizing when you told the story?
I had a girl coming in, and she was very shy, super shy. Also because I'm a man, right? Which is already there, breaks, is a man.
Awkwardness, right?
It's awkwardness. Even for me, I've done this 100 times. Like when you go to the doctor, you just sweep through things, And I remember even because we have to measure how big people's heads are. She just got so, no, you can't do that. No, I don't want you to know how big my head is. I'm like, it's not a big thing. So I had to sort of explain it to myself and show, hey, this is how big my head is. You see, this is the cap that's supposed to go there. I brought another person in showing this is how it's done. And I can just see and explaining all the different anatomies. And I use myself as an example because, I have different bumps in my skull too. And people can feel that on themselves. We have a little bump in the back of our heads. It's called the inion, which we use to use EEG caps. And I just kind of had to show her, hey, listen, I have a bump here. You have a bump there. This is what we're using. And this is an anatomical markers, and happens all the time. And you can see sort of that level of anxiety so slowly going down, just because this explaining this is entirely normal, those situations, and I've done it before, where we have some research assistants coming in, and they just go straight to the just get it on, put the sensors on, do all these things. And you can see them; they're just so freaked out. And I think, I don't know, maybe you've done it when you've gone to a doctor, or a specialist or something, where you feel like this person does not know how to interact with people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that change the results, though? I mean, if they start out so stressed out, that has to, at least the impact of that has to impact the very first part of the study until they get into a rhythm.
Yeah. I think, a big part of it is bringing people from whatever state they came in to that sort of relaxed state. What we can see is that when people enter, their resting heart rate. This is what people usually, when they think about heart rate, the resting heart rate, or just the heart rate in general, actually varies quite a lot. So we have some people that have super high heart rate, just pumping away because, either they're smaller people or just or children or younger. We don't bring children in, or larger people, or just more nervous or whatever. Right. And so we can see that rate is very different. But the modulation of the heart rate is not seemingly, as this is the results we're getting, is not affected by that. So we still see that the heart rate goes up and down, and that is still in synchrony, despite the fact that you have high or
elevated or lower.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can still pay attention even though you're nervous, and you can also not pay attention if you're nervous.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that story about the young woman coming in and being so scared, and you're describing what was going to happen and showing her on your own head. And part of what resonates with me about that story is that I can't tell you how many of my clients or my podcast guests have said these words: I never really fit in.
Right.
And if out of 260 interviews, like 200 of them say that, what does that say for our communities? Nobody ever really fits in, I guess, or at least a very few of us. So I love that you are demonstrating that. I think it's significant, really, that you can demonstrate that this is, that there's comfort in being similar to others in some ways. We all want to be unique. We all want to stand out in our own ways. But at the same time, there's comfort in knowing that I'm in good company, that what I'm experiencing in my internal dialogue is nonstop, that I'm not the only one with that nonstop internal dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something, it's a field that we're really interested in right now. It's daydreaming, because we're measuring attention, right? So when you are there talking in front of a big audience and you want to captivate your audience, you want to just keep their attention all the time. And it turns out that maybe this is not necessarily the right way to go. I don't know if the right or wrong. It's maybe a wrong way of phrasing it, but
well, it may not have the impact that you want it to have.
Exactly.
It's like when I'm speaking, I pick out 3 things maximum, depending on how long the speech is. 3 things I want people to remember. And everything I say is to bring those 3 points to some clarity in a person's head. But if I'm trying to entertain and keep them engaged for a full 25 minutes or an hour, even worse, they're only going to remember one of those things.
Yeah. No, my point is that, we are developing tools that, at least in this setting, can measure whether or not you're paying attention or not. And you can't just optimize for that, meaning that you have to have the highest amount of attention constantly, all the time, because then people sit there and you're like, the listeners can't see it, but I'm opening my eyes. We have to have like a sort of Orwellian kind of perspective,
right? Which is frightening.
So that's not you can't just if you see people not necessarily being fully attentive, you can't just force them to do it. And so at least what we're seeing is that this daydreaming, or the cycles of attention, you're paying attention, see that people are paying attention, and then you say something that maybe people should reflect on, or at least sort of starts resonating something. You need to, consolidate or whatever, or just in general, just put that in perspective in terms of your own life. And that's important. So you can't just, when people start zoning out at that point in time, just say, no, but see me. Like, no. There is a cycle, and just the fact that people are seemingly swaying attention in and out is not necessarily sort of a sign of you being a bad speaker or a bad narrator or whatever.
That makes so much sense. And the application for all of this work, one of the things I read was that some of this study was done on people who are patients, medical patients who are unresponsive or mostly unresponsive. And it wasn't just their heart rates you were watching as a story was being told, but somebody else in the room. I think this is what I got from it, so that you could tell whether there was the social connection. Was that what I read?
What you can do is, and this is the remarkable thing, you can simply have a person in whatever geographical position, right, and record their heart rate or whatever physiological signal you want when they listen to the story. You need a timeline, so you know that this beat was exactly when this was said. Like, so you have to time align these recordings. Now I can do that, and I can make another recording somewhere else, and another one, right? And you can compare these across the world, and you can tell by comparing one person's heart rate to that of the other people that you recorded, whether or not that person was paying attention or not. Okay, and you can do the same thing with patients of consciousness, or at least on the spectrum of consciousness. This is the problem. People don't talk about coma, or people are awake. I mean, it's a whole spectrum, right? And in those settings, you can still record people's their heart rate and compare that to a healthy cohort. Right? So, or healthy, I don't know what that word means, but
a conscious person,
right? Conscious people, right? And you compare and see how similar is that person to that cohort of conscious people. And the more similar they are, the more likely that they are going to, get out of that
state.
State.
Wow.
And
that really is amazing.
Yeah. And so it's a very common thing. So a lot of studies have done these kinds of things where, you have a social component. So essentially you sit there, a whole group of people, let's say you pay attention to some sort of narrative, a person on the stage or music or whatever, like some sort of stimulus, right? And you can record that, and you can see that people's hearts start synchronizing, right? We just showed that the social component is not necessarily, necessary. It's not a necessary condition for our hearts to synchronize, meaning that it's the narrative, at least the narrative is a strong component in driving these hearts. So you don't have to be around people. Now, of course, there might be some synergies. There might be some other effects happening that could change or increase this synchrony when we are doing that in a social setting. We just wanted to be sure that we have sort of the basics. We don't have to be together, and then we can start looking into other things as well after that.
Is that what's next? Where you actually get people in the same room to do this? Because that is really appealing to me.
Yeah, I would love it. I'm a young researcher, and this is the little. Sometimes it's a little frustrating that you have all these questions and these excitement. A lot of people that are excited about it, but you just need the funding to do it. And so you go out there and you figure out, okay, where can I get this money? And it's a long process. It's a lot of work. It takes months and months and months. And so, yeah, I would love that. I would love to sort of dig into both musical experiences, but also narratives and things like that. It's a big field.
It is.
We are working with different things we're working on is the brain-body interaction. So how the brain is communicating with the body, and sort of looking a little bit more into what's happening both through narratives, but how is that different to, let's say, everyday tasks, and how does that change over development and things like that. So those are the things that we're interested in right now.
So the heart-brain connection, for sure.
Or I mean, it's a weird. Our body is just fascinating. It's like
it's so complicated.
It's so complicated, right? And every single time you poke at a little thing over there, you see like all these other things. So we just found out, that our breathing has an influence on our pupils. Our eye movements can modulate our heart rate. All these weird things that are happening. We just need to figure out what's going on.
Well, and beyond that, what I hear from you that really endears you to me and the research you're doing is the application of it. You're seeing the potential for improving things for people. The first thing we talked about was being able to use music or narrative storytelling to help deal with depression or addiction or PTSD. How do I process these emotions in a safe way? It doesn't include pharmaceuticals. And so when you think about your body of research so far, I know you have so much ahead of you that just I want to follow. I just want to kind of be a little fly on the wall for your career in research.
Yeah.
But in your body of research so far, what is something that you see serious application in terms of people's lives, the satisfaction and health in the people around you? Because you have that sensitive soul. I know this matters to you.
Yeah, it does. You're right, and it's a fun thing you sort of identified, because I'm so affected by the emotional state of my surroundings that I just genuinely want everybody to be happy and feel good. So how can I do that?
Contribute.
One way, of course, is sharing the story about how similar we are, right? Or what it is that sort of somehow attracts our attention, and what effects does that have on us? I would love. I kind of put the whole emotional research thing a little bit on the side, just because it didn't really fit thematically into the project I got hired in. But now that I'm sort of progressing through my career, I want to go back to that and sort of potentially develop tools to teach emotional intelligence, which is a tricky thing. But if we can actually go there, I think a lot of different disorders or problems people are having is just that, right? It's the dealing with our emotional state. And just the feeling that maybe we're alone. We're, just this idea that we're alone, and we're these people that are just this, I don't know, so different from everybody else. And like, I'm the only one having these thoughts and these feelings. Like, no, we all have them. Talk about it. This is totally fine to talk about. And so I think both in terms of my research, I really want to go back to looking into the effects of our emotional both expression and internal emotional state into how we perceive the world, and how how maybe that changes things a little bit, and at least loosening up those knots about how different or how similar we are in our experiences. I want to go in that direction. So development is something I'm really interested in. And so how the brain-body connection and how we perceive the world, and we can sort of look into that using naturalistic stimuli and naturalistic behavior. So oftentimes in neuroscience, you see a lot of results and a lot of headlines. And when you start digging down into the method section of the paper, you see, so this experience was actually done, like, let's say, in an fMRI scanner. It's a remarkable tool. You get really nicely detailed pictures of where in the brain things are happening. But it's also in a big tube that's very noisy. And, you lie there, and then you have to lie still and listen to the music or watch these things. And maybe that's not necessarily
real life.
Real life. It's like, that's not how I usually hang out and watch a movie. And maybe my behavior and my reactions would actually be changed by that fact, right?
And the social interactions of watching a movie together.
Right, that too.
For sure.
And another aspect is, a lot of the stimuli that people have used also in the past has been, we need to figure out this very specific mechanism in the brain. So in order for us to tease that apart, we're going to do like a bunch of different sequences or different types of stimuli. Let's say we're going to show a lot of dots, some other dots, and some third dots, and some blinking ones, some gradients, some flashes, some noise, whatever. All these different types of stimuli where we can really map out all these things, which I think is remarkable. And this is, all the knowledge that we're sort of leveraging and sort of digging deeper. But what I'm more interested in is, do these things still happen when we are in a natural setting, just everyday life, just doing what I would usually do and not restrict that behavior, and also engaging with some. I mean, in our case, it would be wonderful if we can just go through everyday life and have all these sensors on. The problem, at least the challenge with that kind of research, is replication. So how can you replicate that situation? Well, you didn't really know whether or not the reason why your heart started to synchronize, or your heart did this, or your pupils did that, or your brain did that, was because of this thing over here. Let's say the tea kettle, is starting to make a sound, or you hear a clock on the radio. All these kinds of things, you don't really know what it is. So when we use sort of what we call naturalistic stimuli, meaning recording of a story or a podcast, and we can play this podcast with people, there at least it's a thing. It's an activity that we do all the time. It's an activity where, this is not something that is very wildly uncommon. Listen to stories, or listen to music, or watch videos of YouTube or a movie or whatever. And so the combination of those two things that we want people to be able to at least behave somewhat naturally, and also present them with things that are at least a very natural thing in our daily lives, I think that also will sort of bring neuroscience a lot of knowledge about how it is that we function in our everyday lives. Mm-hmm. And I think, at least for neuroscience, and at least for my career, that's where we're going. And I'm really excited about it, because there's a lot of things that we still don't know. So I think that would have an effect.
I know that in the last 25 years, a lot has changed in terms of understanding the elasticity of our brains. And that changes everything as well. I mean, you could study and find out all the different parts of your brain that light up given a certain circumstance. And then if one part is damaged, your brain still may be able to process certain stimulants because it has rewired itself. So I think it's forever studying. But what I love about what you're doing is the potential for helping, the potential for guiding people to process their own emotions in different ways, and that the treatments that could come. I know when I was in school, I'm not going to tell you what year it was, but my first couple of years of college, I thought I might go into music therapy because I knew that there was a lot of research around the impact of music and treatment on people with Alzheimer's. And my grandfather had just been diagnosed. So I was really considering going into that field. So one of the things that popped into my head, a few things did, obviously, this big, long internal dialogue going, no, I'm kidding.
It's perfectly fine. I mean, you have them, and it's a very normal thing. And again, it's not an uncommon thing to have long internal dialogues. We all do it, I can tell you.
Yes.
This is how it is.
But I was really focused on what you were saying about, there were a few things. One thing was, if we all had sensors on us, that may change our behavior anyway. That's the whole Schrodinger's cat thing. Like, if you're being observed, is that going to change you? That was the first thing that popped into my head. The second thing that popped into my head was the idea of the social context of the impact of stories and narrative, because I can't tell you how many times I've been at a concert and a total stranger next to me, we had to hug after hearing a song, right? Like, it's so powerful, that social context. And so I'm excited and eager to see how you find ways to measure that, especially, again, coming back to the application on maybe people who are on that spectrum of consciousness, to be able to put people in the room with them and see if that changes things for how their heart responds to music or story. And then the last thing that popped into my head was all the research going on at Western Washington University on personal narrative. There's a team researching how stories about children affect their identity, even pre-verbal stages. When you tell stories about your kids in front of your kids, what that does to their identity as they grow. And then Dr. Kate McLean is studying the late teen years of understanding how those narratives can cause conflict in relationships, because I may tell a story about my 17-year-old kid that I tell consistently, but if that story contradicts with how that 17-year-old sees himself in the future and his identity, then I've created this conflict. And so my brain is firing on all cylinders right now. I don't know how I'm going to calm down after this. But Jens, this has been so fascinating. I want to go more into it, but I know that we're running out of time. So let's just come full circle back to what you do and the beauty of what you're finding in your work. If you could kind of wrap that into a short story or a sentence, what would that be?
At first, I have to sort of comment on one thing you said, because it's something that I've observed about my own enjoyment of a narrative or an experience. You must know this. When you are in front of an audience and you have an audience that sits there and just does nothing, right? You sit there and you sit there and, there's no reactions. You keep on talking and like nothing. Yes. You can't even get anything out of these people. And you're wondering what's going on in their heads.
That even happened when I was singing one time. I would finish a song, there's no clapping. And I'm like, wow, can they hear me? Is this thing on? Anyway.
Well, that's more at the end of the experience, right? When you're in it, right? When you're in it, I mean, me as an audience, because now I've been on the stage and I know how it is when you sit there and you have no reaction from people at all. And I don't know why people don't do it, if they're not interested or they're not comfortable like expressing themselves. But what I found is that when people are expressive, somehow sitting there nodding or smiling or just in general, just, somehow show a little bit of engagement, it feels remarkable as a speaker. And so me as an audience member, I do the same thing. It's almost like I kind of like sit there. Wow, yeah, I kind of just because I want to be engaged, and I can see that person looking at me like, "Thank you," like it's giving me some feedback. And when I'm at a concert, you can have those concerts where you go in and you just love this band, where you bring your friend, and that friend does not know this band at all, and this friend will look at you like, "Oh, you like this?" And you can feel, or like anybody around you,
judgment.
You feel, wow, this experience is just becoming way worse just because of your surroundings, right? But if you are in there, where you just are around like-minded people that just love this band, and just wow, and as you said, you hug people and you start dancing and you just have this full, like this expression of feelings and emotions because people are comfortable doing that. Because we have this shared experience of this thing we love. I think that's deeply fascinating. That behavior is deeply fascinating, how our experiences are also shaped by our surroundings and just even the way we think, if you have like a group of friends that are somehow opinionated by something, maybe you're more inclined to think that's the right direction. I think that all those aspects and our peers, like you're saying, as a teenager, if you tell a story that somehow could potentially guide him in some direction, it just has this sort of ability to shape how we think and how we feel and where we might end up. And I think at least, I had to comment on that because I find it deeply fascinating.
Yes.
So your question.
Well, you kind of just answered it. You kind of just answered it. And I'll say this, when you spoke about being in the audience and participating with the speaker or participating with the musician, or how it affects you when somebody next to you doesn't like what you like and how it changes the experience for you in a pretty negative way. If our audience takes nothing else away from this conversation, I hope they'll take that part away, that when somebody is on the stage in front of you or speaking at a workshop or whatever, that if you really want to get something out of it, engaging with them simply by smiling at them or nodding your head, asking a question, will make that experience even better for you and everyone in the room.
It's overwhelming because I've been a speaker where, I had the people sort of actively engaging, and I had conversations with them after, because I feel like, wow, your energy is amazing. First of all, thank you. But they were really interested. Maybe not super a lot, but still that conversation after, it brought me perspective that I didn't even think at all. And just opening that window to having that conversation, and breaking down that barrier you sometimes have as a speaker and then the audience, because I come from Denmark, where our social hierarchy is just pretty flat in general. So we don't really like this whole doctor, this professor, that. And so I really enjoy bringing everything down to a level field where we can just talk about things that are nothing stupid to say. Stupid questions don't exist in that sense. It's just because I need to communicate or teach you about this thing. And so I think that at least has being a speaker has helped me a lot to be sort of an active audience.
Yes, completely agree. I know that performing as a musician changed the way that I see musical performances, for sure. And same with speakers. And every story you've told, every sentence out of your mouth has demonstrated the kind of researcher you are. And as an engaged audience member, I don't think I can express how much I appreciate the work that you're doing, and whatever I can do to help spread the information that you're learning in your research. I'm in 100%, and I'm guessing my listeners will be as well.
I mean, it's funny that just during this conversation, we made an observation about how we as people react. Like, we just had this conversation. I've talked about this before, but I never really formalized it as a research project. I think I just came up with a research project. I want to investigate this, I want to investigate both of those aspects about an active audience and about what the change of experience is based on your peers, and how does that change how we see things. So I love these conversations because you get all these ideas, like this is the wonderful thing about science, because science is not something that's like this weird sort of planet somewhere else. Then you could look at these people like, right. Oh yeah, science does this, or I don't believe in science or not. I don't understand this concept. It's just basic observations. I mean, we just try to see if it's true or not, or if it's only sort of very anecdotal.
Right. And I would say that the difference between your research and some others that I've seen in the past is that yours comes from a place of not just curiosity about what happens when, or what if I, or why does this happen? It also comes from a place of how can we use this information to improve somebody's life, to help them, guide them to find more satisfaction, more emotional well-being, more emotional intelligence. Thank you, Dr. Goldman. But that's what I've loved about our conversation, is that it all comes from a foundation of deep care for others.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people miss that when they're looking at research, or some researchers miss it, but you don't miss it. And I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, it's not something that I talk about during any basic scientific or any other fora for that matter. Rarely, it's like more of a personal conversation, and which, I don't know, it's a little tricky. It very much depends on the scientific or environment you're in. But I that's just who I am, and that's like this sort of deeply rooted in me that I can't,
Well, that's a good thing.
Right. And caring about other people, it's just, and the best way we can. I mean, I always had this perspective, that we're human beings, we're a human race, we're on this planet, and we need to sort of work together to make everything better. That's like, I don't really care if I win, if I lose. That kind of sucks. So, I kind of just want to do the best that I can with the tools and whatever that I've developed, or I have the ability to have, to make people's lives better. And that's,
Wow.
I think, that's all we can do, all of us, I think.
Agreed.
Right?
Yes, totally agree. Jens, if people want to get in touch with you or follow you or see more of your research, where do they go?
I have a webpage, jensmadsen.com, or you say jensmadsen.com. I have to always translate it to the American
Pronounced
accent.
with a Y, but spelled with a J.
Yeah, I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just one of those things. It's a Northern European name.
Well, that's how I was pronouncing it first. And that's actually how I pronounced it. I think I pronounced it when I spoke at that keynote last week. But sorry, go ahead.
No, that's totally fine. So you can go there, and I can send you my email address as well. It's very effective to contact me there. On my webpage, I also have a link to my Twitter, where I don't use my LinkedIn that much. Maybe other people do. So yeah, Twitter or email would be the best.
Great. And listeners, you don't need to pause this or anything. All of this information will be in the show notes associated with this podcast at elkinsconsulting.com. So thank you, Jens, for joining me today on the Your Stories Don't Define You podcast. And friends, now it's your turn. What story have you been telling that may have been creating a negative perception about you? And what stories can you share that will demonstrate the beauty of the people and the environment around you? What resources do you need to make sure that you are telling the right stories and listening to the music that will connect you with the people around you? Thanks for listening.
Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.